to them. At that moment, open-eyed, wide-eyed, they recognized him, and then he disappeared. Back and forth they talked. Didn't we feel as he conversed with us that our hearts were on fire as he opened up the scriptures for us? They didn't waste a minute. They were up and on their way back to Jerusalem. They found the 11 and their friends gathered together, talking away. It really has happened. The master has been raised up. Simon saw him. Then the two of them went over everything that had happened on the road and how they recognized Jesus when he broke the bread. Today, I'm going to cut right to the chase. These two disciples are no doubt feeling dejected and bewildered, heartbroken and lost as they walk along the road from Jerusalem to Emmaus. They were still trying to figure things out, figure out just what had happened, what they are going through, and what might happen next. It was late in the afternoon on Sunday, the first day of the week, which was the third day after Jesus' crucifixion and burial. According to Luke's telling of the resurrection story, even though it was late afternoon, no one had yet even seen Jesus. The only hint of any resurrection was the report that had been given by Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and some other women who had gone and found the tomb empty, but they had not seen Jesus. When they told the disciples that two angels had appeared to them, proclaiming Jesus being raised up to live again, the disciples thought that the women were talking nonsense, and so they did not believe them. Naturally, these two disciples are hashing all of these things out when suddenly, out of nowhere, a stranger appears and walks up by them and says, "What's up? What you talking about?" Talk about an awkward moment. Our scriptures indicate that at first the disciples just stood there with long, sad faces. I would be like, "Do we know you?" Imagine it this way. If you were talking to your friend today about the coronavirus, because after all, we all talk about it, talking about the lockdown, talking about the protests, and the questions about reopening. Is it too soon? Should we wait? Should we go back now? So many questions. And then suddenly, out of the blue, a total stranger walks up right beside you and says, "What's all that about?" "Excuse me? Where's your mask? Could you step back a couple of feet? Dude, do we even know you?" Our scriptures do indicate that the disciples regained their composure and explained the wild, wacky week that was, starting with the procession, the parade into Jerusalem, the turning over of the tables in the temple courtyard, the Last Supper, the washing of their feet, the betrayal, the arrest, the trial, the crucifixion and the burial, and even their disbelief at the report of the women from the tomb. Can you imagine the amazement that the disciples felt when this guy, this total stranger, immediately references multiple scriptures from the prophets and the Psalms, tying them all together to paint a picture explaining all that they had just told him that had to happen in order for the prophecies to be fulfilled, in order for Jesus to be able to return to his glory. Now, can you also imagine the moment when Jesus broke the bread before them and blessed it? It's like the scales fell off of their eyes. Jesus' appearance changed, and they saw him, and they knew him, and they knew it was him. And then suddenly he was gone, just as quickly as he had appeared. I see some interesting talking points in this story that I would like for us to think about in consideration of our walk with Jesus in these modern times. Number one, Jesus came alongside the disciples at a very low, very painful, very confusing and frightening time in their lives. Guess what? That's what Jesus does. Didn't Jesus promise that he will never forsake us, that he will never leave us alone, that he would be with us all the way, even unto the end of the earth? It's just like in that song that we heard on the video, "You'll Never Walk Alone." When Diane and I attended Howitt Street years ago and then became the pastor there was a man by the name of Al Bolton. Diane had actually known Al and his family from Christ Lutheran Church when Diane was growing up down there. Since that time, Al had been divorced and remarried, and he and his wife and a couple of other ladies from church would sing quartet songs quite frequently for special music. But every once in a while, Al Bolton would sing a solo, "You'll Never Walk Alone." His voice was amazing. And something in the way he sang it, perhaps because of being a recovering alcoholic, there was never a dry eye in the house as he sang about walking through the wind and the rain with hope in your heart. You'll never walk alone. That's how it is with Jesus. We'll never walk alone. We certainly need Jesus by our side right now, because this is a very painful, very frightening, very confusing, very stressful time for all of us, all around the world. And Jesus is right here by our side, just like he said he would be. I really like those ads that they've created promoting the theme, "We will get through this together." That's how I feel about Jesus by our side. Like he is saying to us, we will get through this together. Yes, there will be too many lives lost. Yes, there will be too many jobs lost. Yes, there will be too many businesses lost. But Jesus will still walk beside us through this valley. And Jesus will be right beside us on the other side of this valley, helping us to grieve, helping us to rebuild, helping us to start up new businesses, helping us to rebuild our church, helping us to create new jobs, and helping us to find new ways of worshiping God, and helping us find new ways to share the good news of Jesus Christ and his love and eternal life. Number two, Jesus uses ordinary people, just like those two disciples, to participate in extraordinary miracles. I love the video that Jeff shared for his call to worship, and what an amazing coincidence, Jeff. You didn't know this, but I saw that video for the first time last night. Diane's cousin sent it to me on Messenger from Arizona. Remember the story that he told about the two boys, the boy with the two fish and 5 loaves of fish, five loaves of bread. I'm sorry. Jesus didn't need that boy's sack lunch to feed 5,000 men and their wives and children that day. He could have created the food out of thin air, but he wanted to let that boy participate in making miracles happen. And what about the paralyzed man on the roof with 4 friends that led him down through the roof with ropes? Jesus could have healed that paralyzed man while he was still on the roof, but he knew how important it was to give those 4 friends of his an opportunity to be part of his miraculous healing. And I see examples of his presence and his miracles popping up through the actions and words of ordinary people everywhere today to inspire us, to give us hope as we walk through the wind and the rain. There was a story on NBC News about a young lady that works at a grocery store, stocking the shelves, putting her life at risk so that other people can have food to eat. But that wasn't enough for her. She started finding elderly people in her community that could not risk going to the grocery store and started doing their shopping for them, just like Isaac Ackerman has offered to do for our church folks. And there was a contestant from The Voice who didn't win the competition 2 years ago, but she moved up high enough in that competition with her amazing voice that she was on world tour when the pandemic hit. But she left her world tour behind to risk her life by going back to the hospital to care for COVID patients because she felt it was the right thing to do. And when this pandemic started, and the governor of every state was competing with all of the other governors to try to get masks, to try to get gloves, most importantly, to try to get ventilators. Now that some of the governors have more supplies and more equipment than they need, they are sharing their supplies and their equipment with governors of other states freely. Again, being part of the miracle working power of Jesus spreading throughout our land. I was especially touched by a story that they had about a retired farmer from Kansas. He found 5 N95 masks that he and his family used to use when they were actively farming. His wife has terribly compromised lungs, and they have 2 other people in the household. So they kept 4 of the masks because they would need them. But the 5th mask, he sent it to Governor Andrew Cuomo in New York. He said, I know it's only 1 mask, but you can give it to a hospital worker. Ordinary people working together to be part of the miracle that Jesus works in our time. Point number 3. Do we know Jesus? Do we really know Jesus? Can we see Jesus in other people? The disciples in our story seem to have scales over their eyes that prevented them from recognizing Jesus. I wonder, do we sometimes have scales over our eyes that prevent us from seeing Jesus in other people? Mother Teresa, now Saint Teresa of Calcutta, India, gained worldwide respect from everyone through her constant and tireless loving service to the poor and the infirm. It didn't matter whether she was in the chapel or in the slums. It didn't matter whether she was bandaging up wounds of lepers or raising funds to build hospitals for HIV patients, or whether she was visiting criminals behind bars in prison. She saw Jesus in everyone. The way she put it, she trained herself to see Jesus in his most distressing disguises. In other words, she recognized the biblical truth that all people have been created in the image and likeness of God, regardless of what our mistakes, our faults, our shortcomings, our imperfections, and even our crimes might be. I remember that Bob Carpenter used to do prison ministry as well because he was able to see Christ in the faces and in the hearts of the prisoners that had done wrong and still needed the love of Jesus. It's easy to see Jesus in people that we like and admire. It's easy to see Jesus in people who are nice. It's easy to see Jesus in people who do good. But can we see Jesus in the other kind of people? The people who are poor and begging by the side of the road. The ones who are too sick to care for themselves. The ones who are helpless. The ones who are different than us. The ones who rub us the wrong way. The grumpy, grouchy ones. The ones who disagree with us. The criminals locked in prison. Whether we know it or not, whether we recognize Jesus or not, we need to know that he is always walking beside us. The question is, will we recognize him? Will we know him? Will we listen to him when he speaks to our hearts? Or will we look at the other and say to him, say to Jesus, in that distressing disguise, do we know you? I'd like to close with this benediction that Diane found in Dynamic Preaching. May the Christ who walks on wounded